I'm 62 years old. For the past 5 years, I've been living alone on the edge of a forest in northern Montana. I actually grew up around here. My father was a forest ranger. When I retired, I wanted to come back. My wife passed away long ago and we never had children. So, there was nothing holding me back. I never really liked the city anyway. Too loud, too fast, too crowded. Even your own thoughts get drowned out. The place I call home used to be an old service cabin for rangers. Single story, but fairly spacious. It has a fireplace, wood-paneled walls, creaky floors, a large pantry, and a basement. No phone line, but the radio works. The nearest town is about 20 minutes away. I go there once a month for supplies. I have a generator, and the water comes from a well. So, my connection to the outside world is minimal. I got used to the solitude after all these years. That is, until last winter. It was late November. The weather had turned cold, and the snow had started to fall. At first it was just a light dusting, but as the wind picked up, the white covered everything. The forest went quiet. Even the wind seemed to lose its direction. In the mornings, I had to break the ice in the water barrels. I ran the generator more often and only went outside when absolutely necessary. One morning, something strange happened. I found the woodshed door open. I usually bolt it shut to keep raccoons out. I thought maybe the storm had blown it open, but the bolt was still in place. It looked like it had been unlatched from the inside. I didn't think much of it at first. Maybe I hadn't closed it properly the night before. A few days later, I stepped outside with my morning coffee and noticed the stool on the porch had been moved. A small thing, maybe the wind or an animal. But then I saw footprints in the backyard, in the snow, thick, heavy boot prints. Just one pair, coming out of the forest, up to the porch, and stopping there. No return prints. It was like someone came and didn't leave, or didn't leave by the same way. That sent a chill through me. I didn't think I'd left the door unlocked, especially not in this cold. I always make sure the doors are locked. My eyes drifted to the windows. Nothing moved inside. But when I stepped in, I noticed the chair by the stove had been slightly pulled out. Might seem like a minor detail, but I know every inch of that cabin. I know where everything belongs. I had trouble sleeping for several nights. Even the crackling of the fireplace began to sound unfamiliar. I lay awake listening to every creak, every whistle of the wind. That cabin suddenly felt larger, the dark, deeper. I began to feel like I wasn't alone. One night, around midnight, I heard something. A faint noise from the basement door. I got out of bed, took my rifle, and listened in the dark. The sound came again, a soft click. I held my breath, stepped closer, pressed my ear to the door. I heard it, a faint breathing sound. Not the wind. This was human. I wanted to throw the door open, but what if someone was standing there? I gripped the rifle, grabbed my flashlight, and kept my finger on the trigger. I waited. The sound stopped. I gathered myself and slowly descended the stairs with the light on. The basement looked empty, but in the corner, on an old mattress, there was a dent, like someone had slept there. The mud stains were fresh and damp. Nearby, a half-eaten can of food and a broken matchstick. I didn't leave those there. A tight knot formed in my stomach. As I swept the flashlight back across the mattress, I noticed something else. A pile of sacks behind it, slightly puffed up, as if something had moved or breathed underneath. I turned the light and saw two eyes staring at me from between the sacks. "Don't move," I said. I heard the tremble in my own voice. It was the first time I really felt my age. He raised his hands. "What are you doing here?" I asked. It took him a second to answer. His lips were cracked. "Just warmth. A night or two. I was going to leave," he whispered. For a moment, time slowed. The man didn't move. His eyes were deep, hollow, but he didn't beg. He didn't threaten. He was just there. I gripped the rifle tighter. Without lowering the barrel, I slowly stepped back, up the stairs, one step at a time. My breath caught in my throat. My eyes had adjusted to the dark, but my spine felt cold. At the last step, I reached for the door frame. Still watching him, I stepped through and shut the door. No sound from the other side. I slid the bolt into place. Between us now was just a thick wooden door, but the weight in my chest didn't lift. If anything, it grew heavier. I picked up the radio. My hands were still shaking. "This is cabin 43. There's someone in my home, in the basement. Doesn't appear armed, but he's locked inside. Send security." I looked out at the porch, the snow-covered forest beyond. Silence. Nothing but the wind. 20 minutes later, headlights crawled through the snow. When the officers arrived, I was still standing by the door. They unbolted it, opened it. The man was sitting in the corner. He didn't resist, didn't say a word. He held out his hands. After they cuffed him, he turned his head. Didn't look at me. His eyes were tired, his face pale but calm. They took him out. When the door closed again, the cabin fell back into silence. I experienced this event last winter. Even now, whenever I think about that night, I feel a deep unease inside. Because it started like any ordinary evening. I never imagined things would go so wrong. That day, I had left work a little early. There was a snowstorm warning. On the way home, the streets were completely deserted. Just a few dimly lit street lamps and snow covering everything. As I pulled into the garage, I thought, all right, I'll spend this night warm and quiet. The house is 2 stories, old but peaceful. Its creaky stairs, the smell of old wood, and the silence of the snow always made me feel calm. Everything was normal when I walked in. I turned on the heater, made some hot chocolate. My only plan that night was to get into my pajamas, wrap myself in a blanket, and watch a show. By around 11 p.m., the snowstorm had intensified. As I watched the snow falling under the street lamp, I felt like I was trapped inside a little shell, until I heard that first sound. At first, a soft tapping, then the doorbell. For a moment, I froze. Who could it be at this hour, especially in this weather? Most of my neighbors are elderly. No one rings doorbells around here at midnight. I slowly approached the door and looked through the peephole. There was a man standing outside. He looked to be in his 30s, wearing a dark-colored coat, a hood over his head, hands in his pockets, standing completely still. I put the chain on and slightly opened the door. "Yes?" "Good evening," he said, his voice oddly calm. "How can I help you?" I asked. I'm looking for someone. Does a woman with a red Jeep live here?" I thought for a second. There was no such car on the street. "No, you've got the wrong place," I said. He raised his head and looked at me in a way that made me instantly want to avoid eye contact. Not anger, not a smile, just an empty stare. "I see," he said, and slowly stepped back. I closed the door, but that hollow look stayed with me like a stone lodged in my chest. I went back to the living room and tried to finish the episode I was watching. but I couldn't concentrate. My mind kept going back to that man at the door. Maybe he just made a mistake. I tried to reassure myself, but I still felt uneasy. Not even 10 minutes later, the doorbell rang again. This time it was longer, more persistent. My heart felt like it was about to burst out of my chest. I looked through the peephole. It was him again. This time he had pulled down his hood, and his face was clearly visible. Early 30s, pale, with a face completely devoid of emotion. "Can you open the door?" he called out. I stayed silent. "Come on, I just need to talk for a minute." He reached for the doorknob and tried it gently. That was the moment I fully realized the importance of the chain. I turned off all the lights, tried to make it seem like no one was home. Silence fell. I thought he had left, but it only lasted a few minutes. I heard slow, heavy footsteps on the snow. I looked out from a side window. He was wandering near my yard with a small flashlight. He came close to the windows, trying to see inside. At one point, his face came so close to the glass that my fingers trembled as I pulled the curtain closed. Those moments felt like they stretched on for hours. That waiting in total silence. That silence is what eats away at you the most. I picked up my phone and called the police. Quietly, I said, "There's someone outside my house. He won't leave." Just then, I heard the man's slow, heavy footsteps again on the porch. Then came a few loud knocks on the door. That silence, and those knocks echoed through the entire room. That calm waiting. Sometimes quiet can be more terrifying than threats or shouting. I went upstairs, locked the bedroom door, and pushed the nightstand in front of it. Outside, the snow was quiet, but my heartbeat was so loud, it filled the whole room in that silence. Nothing happened for several minutes. Then I heard the sound of sirens in the distance. That sound at least gave me a bit of relief. When the police arrived, he was still there. They found him near the edge of my yard. He hadn't run. He was just standing there, expressionless, saying, "I just wanted to talk. That's all." Later, I learned that he was obsessed with a woman who lived a few blocks away. She was out of town, and he had likely gotten the address wrong. That night, what if I had opened the door without the chain? What if that man had gotten inside? I don't even want to imagine. These questions still won't leave my mind. What would you have done? If the doorbell rang and you found yourself face to face with a stranger at midnight, how would you react? Sometimes, the moment we say it's probably nothing is the most dangerous moment of all. Now, whenever a snowstorm begins, I double-check my locks. Because that night, I learned just how fragile the feeling of safety really is. Toward the end of last summer, I decided to spend a few days at my cousin's lake house to get away from the city and the chaos of everyday life. The house was completely surrounded by forest. The nearest neighbor was on the far side of the lake, barely visible at night as a faint light in the distance. That solitude and silence felt peaceful at first. I thought maybe I'd clear my head, read a little, swim in the lake. The first day was exactly as I'd imagined. I sat for hours by the lake, watching the calm surface of the water. The soft hum of the wind mixed with the occasional bird calls, and a sense of peace spread through me. The house was small but cozy, wooden walls, large windows, a few worn steps leading from the veranda down to the lake. When evening came, I lit a few candles, made myself a warm coffee, lit the fireplace, and curled up in an old armchair with a book. But as night fell, the lake began to look different. The clear water of the day turned pitch black and still. It looked as if it had been cut off from the world. The house was warm inside, but the darkness outside felt like it might seep in through the glass. It was so deep, so absolute, that staring into it made you feel as though it might swallow you whole. It was just past midnight. The fireplace still crackled softly, and apart from the whisper of turning pages, the house was completely silent. I was about to flip to the next page when I heard a soft sound from outside, from the veranda. First, a light tapping, then a distinct creaking. The kind old wooden steps creak when someone puts weight on them. I slowly lowered the book onto the floor and listened carefully. I told myself it was the wind. Maybe a branch had fallen, maybe a squirrel. But something in me knew it wasn't that. The sound was too steady, too rhythmic, as if someone was walking step by step up the veranda stairs. My heart was beating so hard, I thought I could hear it in my chest. I stood up slowly. Before dimming the lights, I looked out the window. At first, I saw nothing. Darkness covered everything. But then, I noticed movement in the corner of the veranda, a silhouette, standing perfectly still. My first instinct was to check if the door was locked. My eyes shifted slowly toward it. The lock was in place. I tried to take a deep breath, but it felt like my lungs had shrunk. My hand shook as I reached for the phone on the table, but I didn't call anyone. Maybe it was someone who had come to the wrong house. Maybe they were lost. But the unease inside me kept growing. The silence outside grew heavier. What felt like several minutes passed in just a few seconds. Then, the silhouette started to move, very slightly. The sound this time was approaching the window. The footsteps were almost inaudible, but the wooden structure of the house made every step betray itself. I gently pulled the curtain aside. As my eyes adjusted to the dark, I saw it clearly. A man, just a few feet away, standing directly in front of the window. His head was tilted slightly, as if trying to get a better view inside. I couldn't make out his face or his clothes, but he was there, looking at me. We made eye contact. I'm sure of it. Time stopped in that moment. My body turned to stone. I forgot how to breathe. I couldn't even bring myself to close the curtain. For a few seconds, we just stared at each other. That look, it was blank, unmoving, but somehow intense. There was something in his eyes beyond strangeness. There was intent, purpose. My stomach twisted in fear. I slowly backed away. I turned off every light in the house. In that moment, I realized the darkness wasn't just outside anymore. It had filled the house and me and everything around. I climbed the stairs quietly. Upstairs, I crouched by the small window that faced the lake. I placed a hand on the wall. I was trembling. Looking down, I could still see that dark shape in front of the veranda, motionless. But there was such a strong sense of presence in that darkness that I couldn't blink. The echo of our eye contact still rang in my mind. Then, very slowly, it backed away. The steps were almost silent, but I watched. It turned toward the lake, took a few steps, then disappeared into the darkness. It had entered the forest. Only the wet marks on the veranda boards were left behind. I've never been able to forget that night, because that night, silence spoke. I still can't clearly recall the man's face, but his eyes. I'll never forget his eyes. He didn't say a word. He made no sound. But his presence changed the air in the entire house. If I hadn't opened the curtain at that moment, maybe I wouldn't have known he was even there. But locking eyes with him, that's what still keeps me awake at night. Now I realize, silence doesn't always mean peace. Sometimes, silence is the danger itself.